So who pays for the car accident if you're in a no-fault state? I'll use Michigan as our example because that's our primary state that we insure. We do multiples, but let's go into depth on who's actually going to pay for that. There's different types of accidents and different ways that Michigan will have you file your claim. So I don't quite understand in Michigan why if you have an accident that's not your fault, why does my insurance pay for it? Let's dive in and explain exactly how that works and how what's called a no-fault state handles a car accident. The first piece is determining who's at fault. In the eyes of the person paying, it doesn't typically matter. It can on the back end depending on whose portion of fault there is. I get it, I just made it a little bit more complicated, but let's explain a little bit further. For example, most states are what's called an at-fault state, and an at-fault state is clear. You hit someone, you hurt someone, you damage their property, whatever the case is, whoever's the party that has the majority of fault is going to have their insurance pay for that. If their insurance can't pay for that, then they're required to pay, or the other person has to sue them to get the money back. Pretty plain and simple. Now there are what's called mixed states or shared states, so there's some states that do percentages of faults, where if I was bending over to pick up a pencil that I dropped in my car and I hit someone, I might be 80% at fault because that person might have stopped too quickly, whatever the legal way was. So I might be 80% at fault where I'm only required to pay 80% of the claim. In Michigan, it's a no-fault state, which means it doesn't matter who caused the accident. You go to your insurance, I go to my insurance, and then we just are okay. If I have enough coverage, I'm good. If I don't have enough coverage, then whoever the at-fault party is, the companies will go after each other afterward. What that does is it allows us as Michiganders to not have to worry about whose fault it was. There's no argument, there's no fight. We're not going to throw hands, hopefully not. And it's essentially, we're going to just have whatever coverage we have, and we're going to be covered that way. Now what's going to happen is in the background, these companies may go after each other in that similar fashion, where they'll say, you were 80%, 90%. The police report says the liability held on your customer. So as company A, I want company B to pay me back, and then they can do that. Now there's a risk to insurance companies, and this is one of the reasons our costs are a little bit more expensive, is because they do hold a risk. This may or may not pay out. Company B might say, no thanks, we deny that claim. And now I have to go in as a company A, sue them and try to go after those funds, and I may not recoup all of the funds. So even though you're paying a low premium, I'm trying to get the money back, they're saying no, now we've got all these legal fees. There's a lot that can get involved, and that's one of the reasons some of these rates fluctuate. Is if there's a lot more claims, there's a lot more chances of that happening. That's why a lot of people are scared, because they don't know the rules and the guidelines. They may be underpricing it, which means you may lose out, because if they can't recoup the money and they don't pay out correctly, you may be waiting months before you get your car fixed, versus these top tier companies have been adjusted to it, and you may only wait a week or less to get your car fixed and you're back on the road. Now that's neither here or there. So it's still no fault no matter what company you go with. Company A is going to pay for, or company B, whoever you're with, your insurance is going to pay that claim in that situation. Now where it starts to get a little bit tricky is when we're talking about the medical, the personal injury protection. That is also a no fault, but now since 2020, I believe, you can pick different levels and you can completely opt out of it if you have Medicare. So if you have A and B, and there's some rules, I'll link a video at the end that goes over it. But what you have options for is you can now say, I don't want to be covered for this, or I want to be covered just a little bit. And if there's not enough coverage, now who's the one that's liable? At the end of the day, to make it simple, if you're not at fault and the party that is at fault doesn't have enough coverage and you don't have enough coverage, you could go after that party. Or you could go after their insurance. If their insurance denies it, then you go after them, because it doesn't negate the fault. But Mark, what if I hit a parked car? What if I hit a pole? Parked car's a little tricky, because if they're illegally parked, now we're changing who's at fault, right? That could be their fault partially, and that can be just a headache. If it's something, let's say you hit a pole, now that scenario could be that there's a lot of damage. Even if you were at fault, you have what's called PPI, that's Property Protection Insurance, and what that does is that's $1 million coverage. So as long as you don't knock that pole and it hits a mansion and burns the mansion down, there's over $1 million worth of damage, odds are you're probably already covered for something like that. So those scenarios are already covered in Michigan in general. It's fairly inexpensive coverage to have. What if the other driver doesn't have insurance? If the other driver doesn't have insurance in Michigan and you're injured, you have your own medical. You've got the medical that comes with your current insurance policy. So you're not going to have to go after that. In most cases, at least everyone I've insured lately, has what's called uninsured and underinsured motorist. So that comes with uninsured bodily injury. That means if you're injured or someone in your car is injured that's not typically covered on your policy, you've got limits there for that. If they don't have insurance, you've got that uninsured motorist to almost triple protect you on top of the personal injury protection that you already have. And that's where we get into the car, where we've got different levels of car insurance. And I know this might sound confusing. I'll actually link a video that gets a little bit more in depth that breaks these pieces into parts that you can understand. Is we've got our limited property damage, we've got our standard, and we've got our broad form collision. So we've got different levels of coverage that we can choose and carry based on what we want to happen. Do we want to pay deductible? If it's our fault, do we want to not be covered? If it isn't our fault, do we want to be covered? There's all of these different pieces that play a factor in the insurance in Michigan. That's one of the reasons having an agent makes all the difference in the world, because someone that can help you guide through these complex pieces of the insurance is super helpful. If you are looking for a new agent or shopping around for car insurance, I'll put a link in the description below. Feel free to fill it out. We'd be happy to help answer some questions or even give you some quotes from different companies that we work with. As promised, what we need to do next is figure out what are all of those things that we just talked about. We've got the car, we've got ourselves, we've got the other people, we've got the pole, all of those pieces that we need coverage for. How do we know what's enough? I'm going to link our Insurance 101 guide that will go more in depth on each of those coverages. If you're like, I already understand that and I just need to understand the medical, what are my options? What are those law changes that we're talking about? I'll link our personal injury protection, the ultimate guide, that will go more in depth on the exact options that you have available. Again, if you are looking for a new agent, links in the description below. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Otherwise, I'm Mark with Valor Insurance. We'll see you soon.